Greetings, Blue Rose Task Force listeners. This is Agent Elle here, reporting from London. It's with a lovely cup of coffee that I sit here and contemplate the life of Laura Palmer, the experiences with which she has represented the many and the all. As Margaret Lanterman, aka the Lock Lady, has said, Laura is the one. And I know it's almost unquantifiable to express how powerful the story of Laura Palmer has been on the collective consciousness. And me personally, having watched Twin Peaks as a young woman, it was profound, it was unsettling, it was disturbing, but it resonated. And as I grew older and had more experiences in my life, it resonated with more depth and, unfortunately, with more realism in my own life. And it's a part of Twin Peaks which I genuinely think might be the most important part of it. It was a turning point, I feel, for David Lynch as a creator, which I don't think he, as I've said before, always gets it perfectly right. But I do think he has an interest in trauma, in psychological disturbance, but also Laura was the one in turning his gaze towards the experience of the feminine and the, unfortunately, all too common experience of trauma. And it's something that's very profound to me because I think in recent years, post the Me Too movement, we have begun talking about sexual harassment, rape, abuse. We've said the words, which are still hard to say. And it strikes me how ahead of its time Twin Peaks was in depicting this in an unflinching and empathetic way. Fire Walk with Me, I believe, is a masterpiece as a result. I have listened to as much of Laura Palmer's diary as I could, but for my own healing, I felt it was too resonant to delve too deeply in it at this time. But I just wanted to send a message of love and support to John for his work on the podcast. My love and support for the Twin Peaks community as a whole, and my appreciation for the text and all the wider texts that play into it. I know from reading about Laura Palmer's diary how perfectly well it was done. I think it was important that it was written by a woman. So I salute Jennifer Lynch in her work on that. And I wish for healing for the collective consciousness around this issue. And I believe that shining a light on it and depicting it in art, in media, in TV, in music, talking about it, and allowing the gaze to be turned on it is what will ultimately alchemize the hurt around this issue. It's very interesting when you have so much love for a character that is not, in quotes, real. But I do think Laura Palmer has become an iconic totem for many people. And I also have so much respect for Sheryl Lee because I know that not only did her performance touch so many people, but it also in her work in just, keeping the Twin Peaks community flame alive and talking to fans of the work has also been part of her life's journey. And I think she's a beautiful human, and I think she really brought Laura Palmer's story to life in such a way. So I look forward to delving deeper into Fire Walk with Me, but I also hope you enjoy this diving into Laura Palmer's diary and her experiences. And I hope it's not too triggering for some of you. If it is, maybe do like I do and take a step back and revisit it when it's less raw or it's the right time. And I send you all so much love and just golden sunshine.
Be advised, Blue Rose Task Force is filled with secrets and spoilers.
Welcome to the Blue Rose Task Force podcast, where we look deeply into Twin Peaks as a whole, one episode or book at a time, using the full scope of the show Twin Peaks and all its official media. We don't use the word canon, but we consider all official releases important because Lynch and Frost have approved their presence. And we welcome all input into the collective consciousness that is the Twin Peaks community and the wider universe. This podcast is a watch-along podcast for those who've seen all of Twin Peaks, including the third season, which we consider as we go along. Today, we are looking at the first of 3 Twin Peaks books published during its original run, The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer, written by Jennifer Lynch. I'm your host, John. All right, for some bureau business, we have a disclaimer this week. I know that Twin Peaks deals with a lot of really dark, heavy stuff most of the time, but this week it's even more concentrated than usual. We're going to be discussing, because the book discusses issues of sexual abuse, violence, drug abuse, and addiction. Yeah, this book can be a huge trigger for anybody who's dealt with any kind of this abuse. And I can say for sure that that my sometimes co-host Elle Holgate was actually planning on being back for this episode, but it ended up being too triggering for her too. So this is going to deal with a lot of sensitive material, and I'm going to do my best with it. But if you're in a sensitive spot for this, and just make sure you protect yourself before you start in on the secret diary, and just take care of yourself. In the secret diary of Laura Palmer, we've got a lot. Through a series of diary entries over the course of Laura Palmer's life from the ages of 12 to 17, we learn about her interior life, the extent of her abuse, and how she attempts to cope with it all. At 12, Laura couldn't talk about what she was going through. She just wanted to stay away from bad things. At 13, she was still in pain, but was trying to take control of things, finding sexuality can control people and that hurting herself might just leave others with nothing left to do and therefore leave her alone. At age 14, she can swear in her diary, and drugs and Bobby enter into the diary, as well as admitting what Bob was doing, which means it took her 2 years to admit in writing that Bob was a person in her life instead of essentially an abstract concept. Her 14th year is when she finally admits what's happening to her is a reality. And in her 15th year, she realizes everything she's done to change her life from that pain has turned sour and has done exactly what Bob said it would, which essentially leads directly to her downfall. And from there, it just gets worse as she gets older, covering plot points while weaving itself through the threads that make up the show's first season. Now, this book is a tough book to get through, but it's also still part of the Twin Peaks canon, and there will still be some things related to mythology, the way reality works in Twin Peaks. We will be dealing with that, in the normal spot of the episode. And the questions that we're left with in this regard are: how are we shown the two Lauras of the diary? What combination of masking memories and a battle with the proverbial devil are we dealing with? Who are Laura's support system, and what are her coping mechanisms? How do we see Laura's dreams and light? Because we do see her light in here. And how does the whodunit nature of the Twin Peaks television show affect this book? Now, before this book even was an idea that could happen, Twin Peaks had to catch the imagination of the audience. And who killed Laura? Excuse me. Who killed Laura Palmer was like a massive thing in the discourse from April and May of 1990, and it was around then when merchandising possibilities started to grow. And according to Behind the Scenes, Twin Peaks Behind the Scenes by Mark Altman, that was published in December of '90. So this is like really solid, straight information during production. He says, Frost and Lynch were determined not to simply cash in on the Twin Peaks phenomenon, but to create a line of merchandising that was totally original. And at the time, Pocket Books had been publishing a lot of the Star Trek novels. That was like the non-TV version of Star Trek had a long life in books, and it seemed like a great fit for Twin Peaks. And Pocket Books and Lynch Frost Productions did get together to make a deal for a few books. Per Mark Frost, he says, the whole idea of the books is to expand the world of Twin Peaks past the television screen and give people some background that this was a place that was real to us, and give people a chance to experience that. So some specific goals for this book in particular: it does a great job in explaining how Laura can be all the different aspects of the show, or that of Laura that we see in the show. Obviously, we'll be going into that, but it also had a chance to introduce characters that we'll meet in season 2 for the first time. It's kind of like how we'll see Emmett Cooper in the My Life, My Tapes book later on. That was Scott Frost said specifically that was to introduce Cooper's brother into the show through a book, and then he was going to be a character that they were going to add for the proposed season 3 that never happened. In the case of The Secret Diary, it was written while season 2 was already being shot, which means to me that the scripts are ahead of the shooting schedule. So I would say that there were probably about 4 episodes of season 2 written for sure when Jennifer Lynch was writing this, which translates to us already knowing that there would be a Mrs. Tremond and her grandson who appear in the book. Harold appears in the book pretty solidly, connected to the character that we'll meet in that Donna will have scenes with, and that also coincides with the storyline between Harold and Donna, where Donna talks that she tells that one story about the skinny dipping and with the Canada boys and everything. So I would say there's almost a 100% guarantee that was already written. Kind of like how the Bobby Jacoby did she laugh at you scene was already written, and Jennifer Lynch incorporated that scene from Laura's point of view. Now, there's some precedents that this book sets here for all future Twin Peaks book releases. First of all, it's an item that you can actually find in universe. So, like, in theory, like you're Big Ed and you see this in the evidence box. It's not ethical, but you could technically pick it up and read it. And in theory, it should work. Sorry for using Big Ed as an example, but you got to get your You're fun somewhere, I guess, in this episode. Oy. More so than the found items thing, though, I would say the inconsistencies are the thing that is really established here. And I know Lindsay Stamhoyes said, with all the differences in this book versus all the other ones, it's like she can imagine multiple universes of Twin Peaks in these things. Which, I mean, you can think about it that way. I mean, I've had a metaphor going where each item of Twin Peaks is kind of its own planet in a solar system, and they all kind of have a similar gravity that influences each other. There's ways to do that, but yeah. So anyway, there are inconsistencies. Okay, Bobby killed a guy. There's a guy in Lowtown, and then in Fire Walk with Me, it gets retconned to that Deer Meadow deputy. Similarly, there's no Teresa Banks here. It's not that Teresa Banks didn't exist. I mean, to be fair, there's room in the margins, just like how she's known James the whole time, but she hasn't written about it. This is a cross between inconsistencies and unreliable narrator stuff here. Same thing with the no mention of Laura winning Miss Twin Peaks in her last spring on Earth. There's all sorts of things that will show up in future episodes that do get retconned from this book. But besides retconning, there's also this thing where Maddie knows Donna fairly well in this book. I mean, maybe they just haven't met in a while or whatever, and they need to reintroduce themselves. But then Maddie was in the scene where Sarah was getting the sketch of Bob done, and then a couple episodes later, when Maddie meets Donna again in the Double R, she introduces herself by name. So yeah, there's this weirdness where Maddie and Donna don't really know each other, and I know it's mostly a speed of production thing behind the scenes, but there's a certain forgetfulness here that you can almost say with like Maddie and Ronette in particular, where people forget about them immediately when they're not in scenes. Again, it's a production thing, but in the reality of Twin Peaks, it's also worth pointing out. And the most strangely regularly occurring thing is the dates issue. In the diary of Laura Palmer, it ends publication. It ends like a year later. It ends in 1990, and it should end in 1989. But it's strange because we'll see it again in things like the Access Guide has dates about 1991. So it seems like what they ended up doing is that books end up aligning with their publication dates, and as if the case was live that year. So like it's really odd. It's like it's matched up with us when we're watching Twin Peaks, and that our timeline at the time is the one that sticks in our mind best. So maybe that's why they do the dates. But anyway, it's another case for Lindsay Stamhoyes' thing about maybe multiple universes. Now, you could say that Jennifer Lynch was chosen for this because she happened to be David Lynch's daughter, but according to Essential Wrapped in Plastic by John Thorne, Jennifer Lynch said, "The idea started years before Twin Peaks did. I would be in a car with my father. I told him that I long had this fantasy of walking home from school and finding another girl's diary at the edge of the sidewalk by the gutter, of tucking it under my jacket and running home to read it to see if other girls dreamt and felt and feared the same things I did. That stayed with him. When Twin Peaks was born, the idea of the diary inevitably came up as a way to tell more of the story. He called me up right away and said, 'Would you like to write Laura's diary?' 'Of course,' I said. 'Are you kidding me?' So at this point, I mean, she's worked with her father a lot at this point. Like, she was an assistant on Blue Velvet too. So it's like a she's been proving herself that she can handle these kind of this kind of upped involvement, but as she put it, this was also seed to fruition of a childhood fantasy, so it works on so many different levels for Jennifer Lynch. Now when she got the job specifically, she got brought into David and Mark Frost's offices, and I'm assuming this is David Lynch saying it. You are one of 3 air-breathing mammals who know. So, like, she was told who the murderer was, and then she was basically told to go write the diary. And as she says, they gave me free reign. Now, the title wasn't her idea. That was Lynch and Frost. They Jennifer Lynch said the title is a very male way of seeing diaries. Because at the time at the stationery stores through like the 70s and the 80s, they sold all these little diaries that had printed right on the cover, "My Secret Diary," and Jennifer Lynch said that really imprinted on Lynch and Frost. Now, this book was written over a 3-week period. It took a total of 9 actual writing days, and Jennifer Lynch said that she lost it 4 times too. And it's a quote from, and all these mishaps really ended up helping solidify the tone of this book. As Jennifer Lynch says, "Trust me, when you have little sleep and everything keeps vanishing, you think maybe Bob's involved somehow." Ended up making Laura's outlook a lot like. Another quote from Jennifer Lynch: "Sleep deprived and fearful and anxiety ridden, but always with a frank belief that there is goodness from humanity." Now, there are some more details about the production. Jennifer Lynch wrote it not to exclude non-Peaks fans, so you don't have to be totally immersed in the show for this book to work. Only 2 pages were removed by Lynch and Frost because it got a little bit too close to the answer. And then Jennifer Lynch has said on multiple occasions that it felt like part of her had absolutely nothing to do with writing the book. Like Laura was almost channeling through her to write it. And back to Essential Wrapped in Plastic. It sounds like the end point was absolutely left up to Jennifer Lynch. She was in touch with Lynch and Frost about it as she was finishing, but just to make sure that it lined up where they needed it to too. But as far as Jennifer's angle on it, she says, "I wanted her last words to be as hopeful and strong in her diary as they could be." Now, there are advantages to the diary format specifically that Jennifer Lynch wanted a channel. And in addition to being part of Diane podcast, Rosie was also one of the voices in in Laura's Ghost by Courtney Stalling, where Courtney interviews a number of women about their kinship that they have with Twin Peaks and with Laura. And, just the story of, any hardships or any reasons why Laura's story particularly resonates with people. I am not going to quote from that book very much because I consider that a really fine line, and I don't want to step over any more than I have to. But if you feel a huge kinship with Laura Palmer, you are going to get a lot out of Laura's Ghost, and I do recommend it. But it's not just about sexual abuse either. Like in that book, Jennifer Lynch is also interviewed, and she shares how it's there's just the culture of being the culture and being a woman in the culture. It's all interrelated. Jennifer Lynch shared about how she shares sets with other directors and how women are conditioned to feel like they need to act like men and need to compete with each other. She spoke of a specific moment of shift when it goes from being one person's set to another's. And she says, you feel the different energy in different directors, and it can be a beautiful thing or a weird thing. I know that's about fear because I'm scared when it's happening. I try to walk up and just say, hey, have a great day. But sometimes I just can't because I'm too afraid. So I'm part of that. I know it's wrong, but it's a thing done to all women, which goes back to Laura. It's not like Bob or Dad were doing any of the work to pretend things were okay. She had to do it all. That was all on her. And not just because she was a victim, but because she was a girl. And then they were going to judge it. Wash your hands and come on, sing. And it serves up this weird setup. And later on in that same interview, Lynch talks about how she was with a friend about how she was talking with a friend about how normal sexual harassment was in the 80s and 90s. There were behaviors where if it happened to my daughter, I'd say, you called the police, right? There was a part of Laura that would speak up for Donna, but could not speak up for herself. So, I mean, this really does feel to me like the diary is, telling it like it is and like it sounds. And it just feels like it's as authentic as you're going to get. So the end result of this book is that it was published on September 15th, 1990. This was 4 days after the soundtrack was published. I mean, after the Twin Peaks original soundtrack was released, and it was 15 days before season 2 debuted. It topped out at number 4 on the New York Times bestsellers list. There was controversy. I mean, some bookstores wouldn't sell it because of its explicit content, but it still made it all the way up to number 4. So, good on you, Twin Peaks. I didn't read it then, and my parents never brought it into the house then. I saw it at bookstores, but I think part of me didn't want to read it because it's like who wants to know that much? And also, it's like, oh, it's a girl's thing because girl diaries really are coded for women, especially back in 1990. When I did finally come around to read the book, it was in 2015, so I could add some to the conversation to the Sparkwood and 21 podcast. I would not have probably read this at any point if I didn't have to write about it. I mean, I knew where this book was going to go, and Firewalk with Me was tough enough. And I mean, it's like looking straight on at this stuff. And I know that that's the foundation of Twin Peaks. It took me that long to take on this book head on. And I mean, for context, I'm gonna share some of that feedback for Sparkwood and 21 podcast, and I'm going to mix it in with some writing that I did about the Sheryl Lee read audiobook. Right after my 12th birthday is when Twin Peaks premiered. My mom was on board immediately, and I caught up over that first summer. I watched that Saturday Night Live with Kyle MacLachlan and everything. I was on board, and I enjoyed scaring myself with things as mundane as Bob crouching in the corner of Laura's bedroom and Leo hiding behind the door with an axe as Bobby came in. That's how young I was. I was not an early bloomer. I might have been a middle bloomer or even a late bloomer. In diary terms, when I started watching the show, I was definitely a Donna, sad to say, maybe even a Jane. And then that season 2 premiere got real, and my extremely empathetic mind felt the show at that subliminal level, and Bob basically moved in to part of my brain and brought all his stuff with him. For years, Bob was in my nightmares. I actively avoided mirrors, especially in my bathroom, because I didn't want to see Bob looking back. This is me, a real-life person, scared in my core of something from a TV show. Scared I might be inhabited by the boogeyman. I was on one side of puberty and wasn't sure what I'd turn into when I matured. And I prayed to God my baser instincts would not be as primally bad as those Bob displayed. Turning into a man is a scary prospect anyway, but turning into that kind of a man, inhabited by primal evil, especially when he was already in my nightmares, if it can give a boy pause, darn it, it can give a boy pause, yet there he was in my dreams, constantly reminding me of what could happen if I wasn't on guard. This whole time, I'd never once read The Secret Diary, never once watched Fire Walk with Me. I never once knew that Laura was also scared of becoming him from within. By the time I found Twin Peaks on Bravo and watched the episodes in the middle that I missed the first time I watched, I was 17 years old. And that meant for 5 years, the relentless terror of Bob was regularly in my nightmares and therefore was very real. It gives me a point of reference whenever I'm confronted with the diary, as that is the exact length of years covered in this book. I realize I'm a real person who'd never been sexually assaulted, and that Laura was both sexually assaulted and a fictional character, so there's obvious scale issues with this comparison. But the scariest boogeyman of my life was exactly Laura's boogeyman in this book. TV style backseat view of the abuse and violence can leave such an impression on me. I can't even comprehend how a character like Laura could have done anything different than she did in her diary, just to take the weight off her shoulders and cloud her eyes from something more indelible than images alone can produce. Now, usually at this point in the episode, we go into my log has something to tell you, because there's a log lady intro that goes in front of it that contextualized by Lynch. But I mean, it's kind of a famous thing. Well, first of all, there's no log lady intro for this because it wasn't a TV episode, and second of all, it's kind of a regularly occurring thing that David Lynch doesn't read any of the Twin Peaks books. He says, "I have not read this book," and Jennifer Lynch says, "Yeah, he's probably never read this book." He likes to keep his vision of Twin Peaks kind of in his own lane and not influenced by outside sources as much as humanly possible. I get that. Um, but this was a huge influence in Fire Walk with Me, because while David Lynch hasn't read it, Sheryl Lee has. In Essential Wrapped in Plastic, she spoke to John Thorne and said, "The book was with me night and day during the filming of Fire Walk with Me. I carried it everywhere and would constantly refer back to it. It was such a blessing to have. I think that Jennifer's amazing. She's so talented and writes from a place of truth. It's funny, when I see people hold the diary, I almost feel like they shouldn't be reading it. I feel like it's personal. It's a very strange thing. We get very close to our characters. So I did carry the book everywhere and use it." And it's not just Fire Walk with Me where she had it. Uh, in 2017, Audible published the audiobook version of this, done years later, and Sheryl Lee is the one who read it. Something I read in the Sheryl Lee audiobook article was that Lee made sure the heart, soul, and pain within Laura in the book's pages were presented to us, with possibly even more rawness at times than she showed in Fire Walk with Me. How can I say that without automatically being lumped into hyperbole? She conveyed everything about a 12-year-old girl falling into darkness, broke my heart over and over, and to do it, she didn't have to scream once. Yeah, Sheryl Lee absolutely feels this character in her bones. Like it, the way she put it to Courtney Stallings in Laura's Ghost. She talks about how she was just acting when playing Laura, but this happens every day to our girls. Every day, when I'm doing scenes like that, it never leaves my thoughts. And yeah, I mean, this is absolute respect from the actress to her character. I mean, she has a like Laura essentially kind of haunts her career. Like sometimes it's in tough ways. I mean, she had to basically stop acting for a little while to recover from playing Laura in Fire Walk with Me. We'll get into that more during the episode on Fire Walk with Me. But I mean, it's not easy being Laura Palmer and playing Laura Palmer. And yeah, I mean, it's like Laura Palmer keeps coming back too. I mean, in 2017, at the very beginning, there's so many cycles between Sheryl Lee and Twin Peaks, and then she even gets this connection at conventions that she goes to, and she goes to a lot of conventions, and she basically says that's the good kind of haunting when she gets people coming up to her, and I mean they give her the confidence, they tell her they tell her their stories, and she gets to sit with them and let them share their stories, and she finds this to be absolutely beautiful that this can happen, and somehow she carries the weight of all this. And I mean it's a pretty great legacy for a book that, I mean it didn't need to be anything more than written quickly and tie into a TV show. And we get this. It's like, in a lot of ways it's really cathartic, and yeah, I mean, it's Jennifer Lynch and Sheryl Lee and everybody involved went above and beyond, especially in regards to this book. And before we start breaking down the book specifically, we are going to hear from some of our fellow podcasts on the Ruminations Radio Network.
Hey, this is Charlie, Triple C, from Brevity Box, a new and interesting podcast from the Ruminations Radio Network. If you're a fan of podcasts, we have a lot of great content to offer. Come check out our diverse group of podcasts and hosts at ruminationsradionetwork.com.
All right, well, welcome back, and we are going to begin looking into the actual Secret Diary of Laura Palmer now, where we're going to start out by talking about the two Lauras that we see in this book. So the first entry of the book, or the first two entries of the book, take place on her actual 12th birthday, and it's basically a day that's split in half, just like Laura will be. It's very thematic. I'm sure it was on purpose. It begins the first entry is all excitement and like 12-year-old girl happiness. She writes a note in the diary about the diary. It's like, you are my best present. I promise to confide everything in you, share everything with you. She got a present from Donna. Maddie's arriving the next day. And then they're going to go camping in the woods, and we get a detail about how she loves the woods almost as, her dad loves the woods almost as much as she does. And then there's she goes into a dream about her dad moving the whole family into the woods, and there's two songbirds outside the window with a big tree. So it's mostly positive. It's definitely showing us right away that Laura puts a lot into her dreams. Like, they mean something. She remembers them. She feels her dreams. She feels the woods. She gets a present from Donna, and then like she wants to reciprocate it back exactly. It's a good establishing thing while still keeping the tone of happy 12-year-old girl. And then the next half of the episode shows that Laura's getting an even better present, in that Leland brings the family to a stable, and Laura gets a secret pony that she'll share everything with, including a birthday, because that's what happens when a horse is gifted to someone. They share everything. So again, thematic stuff that will happen all the way through this book. And then we get a little note that Laura already knows about penises, because that's the first thing she checks for. And then we get a note that that Bob comes at night, basically. P.S. I hope Bob doesn't come tonight. So we get everything else in this one, a whole bunch of secrets. We don't know how Troy got into this thing. Sarah didn't know that they were getting Troy. And then of course, Bob at the end. So like right there, we get absolutely everything in a microcosm of these factors that are already in Laura's life. And this is like one Laura, and she's going to become another Laura, and we're going to look at how. Now, one dichotomy with Laura that we could look at is how she has the connections with the woods. So there's a in the woods Laura and an out of the woods Laura, sort of. Um, okay, what are the woods already established in Twin Peaks? Well, Harry Truman says Twin Peaks is different, a long way from the world. You've noticed that. That's exactly the way we like it. But there's a back end of that that's kind of different too. Maybe that's the price we pay for all of the good things. There's a sort of evil out there, something very, very strange in these old woods. Call it what you will, a darkness, a presence. It takes many forms, but it's been out there for as long as anyone can remember, and we've always been here to fight it. Men before us, men before them, more after we're gone. And Khalil from the Twin Peaks Wonderful and Strangelove cast basically connected these dots that the bookhouse were no help at all to Laura. And, I mean, he was calling it like a man cave or a place where, guys hang out with their fraternity buddies or something like that. And, it's interesting because like the show is all about that fight, but yet they couldn't focus in on Laura Palmer. And part of that also reminds me that these words about the forest came from Harry, and Harry basically stuck up for Leland in that hearing where Leland's on trial for the murder of Jacques Renault. And, he basically calls Leland Palmer a pillar of the community. So, yeah, the Bookhouse Boys don't really look beyond patriarchy. I mean, I think it's an accidental indictment of patriarchy, but I mean, you got to figure from 1990, patriarchy was just, the default. It's like nobody questioned it. It just was like that right then. And yeah, I appreciate that in this book, a girl who's like not even old enough to be in any adult circumstances, like they're not really being looked at the same way that well, I mean, really anything in Twin Peaks. It's very much, it's like you're either good or you're bad, apparently. And that's kind of how Laura's looking at it too. I mean, she's always talking about making good choices here or making bad choices here. And then she like goes into why she makes the choices. It's like that she tries to control her situation, so she's like more like Donna, or toward the end, eventually she'll she focuses on controlling what she can. She wonders at this age, at 12 years old, like how, she wonders if Jesus had all these, if he was secretly like her, where there were things that were bad, or, did he do bad things? And, it's like she's pretty much scared that, she's doing things that nobody else does. But it's not really a dichotomy. This book isn't a dichotomy of good or bad Laura either. Because I mean, those are like the intention behind the fire. It's like, the good and the bad, they both bring things to her, but it's not who she is, it's what she does. So, even though she's concerned about it in ways where it does affect her life, it's the dichotomy isn't good or bad. It's more so this what I'm calling it authentic Laura and protector Laura. And authentic Laura is the Laura who can feel things, and the protector Laura is the one who basically tries to make the world okay for authentic Laura to be in. So like authentic Laura can enjoy her body and enjoy the sex, and it's like she's really happy that she woke up with an orgasm in her sleep, things like that. It's like anytime Laura feels something, that tends to be the authentic Laura. And even drugs can do that to begin with. Maddie brought the cigarette and it felt kind of good. The boys from Canada brought in marijuana. It's like there are ways to feel good things from things, but you're not exactly trying to bury things underneath that feeling. per se. Like, the feeling of it that she gets that makes her feel okay. I would file that mostly under authentic Laura, but as we go through the diary, it's more and more about controlling her circumstances, and that's all protector Laura by the end. It's the harder Laura who refuses authentic Laura in a lot of ways, and defends her from the attacks and the bad things, and like everything. The protector side of Laura takes on making it through, and eventually the protector side of Laura takes on certain personas too. It's like the public Laura is a thing kind of off. It's like the Laura who gets good grades and the Laura who's in the homecoming photo. It's like don't mind what's actually happening behind the scenes in those things. It's like the public Laura is a byproduct of protector Laura trying to be good. And like sometimes things with authentic Laura come up and match up with public Laura too, because and then you've got Meals on Wheels, you've got Helping Johnny, things like that. But then it mostly keeps up with the protector Laura, because she's keeping her troubles and her secrets like inside where nobody can see them and nobody can touch them except Laura. And then there's another side of Laura that's a byproduct of protector Laura. It's basically coping Laura. Sometimes it lines up with the authentic Laura, because she will still experience certain kinds of sex that makes her feel good, and the feelings of being blissed out and everything. But mostly, coping Laura is trying to be numb and disconnect from that real Laura, quote unquote, the little girl, 12-year-old Laura that she's trying to protect. Now, from a Jungian perspective, we're probably looking at how authentic Laura keeps inside the authentic Laura, or the protector Laura keeps authentic Laura inside her and like becomes a shell around her. And like she actually talks about this sort of thing where, she's going to keep that she's going to keep that good Laura safe from things until she could come out and be with Bobby, or like there's many things that Laura is protecting something now from for a better future. And that to me feels like the archetypes are separating. It's like Laura is segmenting herself into non-integration, essentially. Like she's not being integrated with all the different sides of her. She's trying to go through them one at a time until she feels like she can come back together. And honestly, toward the end, when she's 16 and meets Jacoby, like her, the diary has been a constant coping mechanism through the whole thing. But even that ends up getting segmented. She's kind of talking about her way back to authentic Laura with the tapes that she gives to Jacoby, and then there's a home diary where public Laura can live in, like so people could see that side of her, and then the protector Laura stays in here talking about how she's like doing multiple different kinds of things to to protect herself, and like she's like, I can't even write in here anymore because I'm too busy filling out the other diary and doing the tapes for Jacoby, and then she has to give up this diary to Harold because she can't even protect the diary anymore because she doesn't even think she's going to be around. So yeah, the polarities that she's concerned with is basically being good Laura. She's the one who wants to be like Donna, who actually listens to Bob when he gives her reasons why he does things to her. It's like, oh, you're smelly, you're this. It's like, oh, if she can, just be good enough to take away the reasons that Bob tells her, she's bad, then maybe he'll leave her alone. And like this good Laura action that she takes, and it doesn't take into account that Bob is doing all this grooming and gaslighting. It's like she just wants to get rid of him, doing whatever she can, and And eventually she goes over to, it's like, oh, maybe I could be bad. Maybe the more bad I do. And like, this comes from that one dream where, she chews her own foot off and before the rat can get to it. Laura wants to hurt herself essentially and be bad and be so bad that Bob doesn't have any reason to hurt her and Bob can't hurt her anymore because Laura already did it all. If you look at the polarities of the good Laura and the bad Laura, it's all focused on removing Bob from her life and has nothing to do with her. It's all about Bob. Okay, so who is Bob to Laura in this book? Okay, she knows him already on her 12th birthday. She's already wary of him, doesn't want him around, hope he doesn't come tonight. So he's a feared presence from the get-go. So Christian from Manners and Madness, when they were covering the Secret Diary on their podcast, they got the impression that Bob is a manifestation from Laura. And I'm quoting Christian here, maybe a manifestation of trauma that someone looks like that did to her, a manifestation of a darker side of her life or of herself. Loosely speaking, a mental illness, shame, something that torments her when she's growing up. And then they continue. As teenagers, people will have a lot of shame about sexuality and about growing up and feeling certain things. And Bob is this embarrassment of it in a sick and dark way. And it's maybe easier for Laura to separate herself from it and point it as this demonic evil person, when in actuality, it might be a part of herself who wants to fully commit to this stuff. But she can't because she views herself as evil and twisted. And Christian was a newbie for this podcast. So like he didn't actually know who Bob was or anything, but he ended up picking Leland as the killer in this at the end of this Secret Diary series they did. So Bickering Peaks, they definitely second this opinion. Lindsay over there said Bob could be a psychological artifact of abuse. But then we get all the stuff from the TV show. It's like, who is Bob to Leland? Well, Mark Frost, in Twin Peaks Behind the Scenes, the book by Mark Altman that was published in '90 during the show's run, Frost basically describes Bob's psychic powers, and he says, when Leland talks about knowing Bob as a child and says this was someone who invited me to play and I invited him in, there's a certain classic type of vampire myth that comes into play when a soul that invites something into it to take part in its life cannot then refuse it anything. That's a myth that goes way back before pre-Christian times, and that's one possible explanation. The other is that Leland is just completely whacked out of his mind. So I mean, you could see that pretty clearly that, it could also be that sort of parasite. Bob and just like, okay, he was successful with Leland for sure. Based on everything from episode 16, let's assume that it's at least what Leland believes the situation is. It's possible that that Bob is here in this book beginning the process with Laura where he's trying to hollow her out. In episode 16, some of the quotes that Leland is saying as Bob is, Leland was a good vessel. Now he's full of holes, a hole where his conscience used to be. Pull the ripcord and watch him remember. So like, is that hole being filled with memories that Bob is finally letting him see? It's like, there's all sorts of ways to look at that, which we will later. But, after the entry exactly after meeting the log lady, it's the 22nd entry of the book. It's 3 days after that, and Laura is in the woods listening to the woods. She gets this idea that inside the trees are souls. So like she's paralleling with what we know about the log lady, and part of it goes in about how like humans don't think to see what the trees and the woods can tell them about things that happen to her, like all the signs of trouble, all the signs of what was probably a rape by Bob on Laura. Like there's all sorts of things in that are so obvious, but it's still coded in like a certain kind of poetry, the way that Laura is writing it in this entry. But one thing she talks about is there's a new hole inside her, a new smaller mouth underneath her mouth. So it's like in her, it's like around where her heart is, probably, where she's describing this smaller mouth. And this is like, doubles and splitting, and the Jungian way of like separating parts of yourself, compartmentalizing. And it's like the division of herself, but also in the shape of a physical wound. And I think this is the beginning of Bob trying to hollow out Laura to make space for him inside her. Yeah, I mean it's pretty clear. Like at the end of that entry, she says, "It is late and he came tonight." I don't think the log lady was talking about the right Laura Palmer. So yeah, there's these physical results after an assault, but it still happened and it takes shape spiritually as well. But here, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Leland was weak enough that he just let Bob stay in that hole. But, here, Laura doesn't let him in. She immediately decides to fight from that point. Now, I mean, there's other tricky parts about how Bob is seen by other people that could tell us more about how Bob is in the whole of Twin Peaks. Sarah finally starts seeing Bob after Laura's dead. It's like that's when she sees her first vision of it. So it's almost like the manifestation of her guilt finally lets her see what was already happening. The physical form of Laura's abuse is finally starting to take shape because, how else did Laura die? What are the reasons for it? Well, maybe she can finally see. Why Maddie sees Bob, it's probably because Bob is trying to restart the cycle with someone and he makes it known to her. There's logic with this later, but like, does this work the same way with Cooper? He sees Bob in a dream first off, and I think in that way he's connected more to the side that Bob is like a vampire-like entity, connected by dreams, which is where the Red Room and the Black Lodge kind of characters can live. That's how Laura first saw Bob, through dreams. It's like she wasn't sure it was even happening for years. She didn't realize that it wasn't just dreams doing it to her. I mean, not all parts of herself realized it wasn't just dreams. The same Christian from Manners and Madness episode basically wonders if Cooper's embracement of the supernatural elements of Twin Peaks is that him giving in to Laura's all-consuming psychological journey. So that almost figures into Laura as the dreamer. It's like, is all the supernatural stuff born from Laura? And it's taking physical shape because of her trauma. There are all sorts of ways to look at this. There's also Bob's relation to the missing pages of this book. And this kind of goes into more like, who is Leland, who is Bob? The missing pages per Jennifer Lynch in Essential Wrapped in Plastic, the pages that are, the ones that say the page has been ripped out. Why would they be ripped out? Because they would lean into something that Leland would want to tear out. It would be calling out Bob and Leland in it. It had to affect his ego, essentially. It's like what he chose to leave in, and this is according to Jennifer Lynch, is an attempt to embarrass Laura. And what he'd remove would be hurtful to him in his pride. She said, and Lynch said that it would be maybe Sarah starting to know something. It's like Jennifer Lynch said the perfect family picture had to stay alive, so the pages had to go. Now, when Diane podcast covered this book, they framed the book as the maiden, the monster, and the fight between them. They're basically saying you don't have to take a supernatural reading at all on this book. It's a psychological reaction of a young girl who is suffering from abuse, and as they say, it maps perfectly over the supernatural related elements. It's like the book parameters itself, the ones that ABC imposed on this book, force Laura to hide the truth from herself, which is I mean, it's psychologically truthful, and it ends up working with what's needed in Twin Peaks too. You know, it's like we can't spoil the mystery in here. We can't find out who Bob is. So this means the in-universe Laura that's working on this book isn't actually too deeply looking into that answer. And why isn't she looking into the answer of who Bob is? You know, why isn't she Nancy Drewing it? Because of fear. You know, it's the Diane podcast goes on, the splitting of the personality, the stunning growth of their victim. Bob is the voice inside her head of guilt, depression, and sickness, and is omnipresent, but not entirely. Here, he only manifests as mental illness rather than evil that is done by man. And, you know, that it's interesting, like how it takes, I mean, it takes the whole book. It takes the whole book to kind of figure out that Laura is actively keeping the secret from herself because she doesn't want to know. I mean, there's an entry kind of in the middle, I think when she's 15, where she's basically talking about, I am who you think I am, basically. Um, it's like fear keeps truth from becoming a need until the want is strong enough to overcome her fear on the subject. um, the whole arc of Laura in this book is to overcome her fear and move from the innocence of not knowing to knowledge. That said, it really does match well with this battle with the devil that Diane podcast talked about. Rosie, one of their hosts, she basically said, if a demon's going to come for you, it's not going to come for your stuff and career. It's going to come for your soul and your mind. And yeah, I mean, that's essentially what Bob is doing. You know, he's trying to take up real estate in every thought of Laura. The battle between them, I've said it already. I mean, it starts with that rat dream. You know, it's like she may be in the trap, but she's actually owning it. You know, she's fighting the actual devil, going into herself to do it. Whether she knows she's going into herself to do it or not, that's a different case. But I mean, essentially, it's that kind of battle. One good thing about this battle being there from a narrative standpoint is like how I think this was Rosie again. She basically said, "Fighting the devil saves this from being a cautionary tale." So without battle, it'd be who, like what could Laura have done differently not to die? You know, we'd be thinking about that the whole time. But because it's an active thing, Rosie continued, she is a shining example of resistance. Her life should have pleasure and magic in it, and she never gave up on that. So Laura's trying to create distance from her presence here. That's one thing. Another thing that the Diane podcast noted, it's like she's reducing herself, like she's becoming, it's like we don't hear about the outward shell of a life. That's what I was calling the public life. It's like she's retreating into herself in a certain way. They got me wondering if Bob is this wisdom or the fire that she needs to walk through in order to understand that it's Leland. Like, does she need to walk through this whole dream scenario or this thing that she started to know in her dreams? Does she have to go through that completely in order to get through the facade that it was Leland the whole time? And, like I said, it's like she doesn't really want the answer of who Bob is. And Bob even tells her in the diary, I am who you think I am. And there's still pages and months, and I think over a year at that point before the book finally ends. And that means that she finally agrees with that answer. As far as how Jennifer Lynch spoke about the ending in Essential Wrapped in Plastic again, she said, I wanted to give her enough so that she went away with some of her last thoughts being, I know who I am, and I know what is being done to me. Whatever the other side is, I have done as much as I can with this life. So it really was about a battle through this whole thing. And it's about, I mean, it's essentially what everybody's been saying up to this point, where she's wanting to not give in to the people that are trying to make her lose herself. So now begs the question, what tools does Laura have while waging this battle she's waging against Bob? Um, I mean, however fragile it is, she does have a support system and she does have some coping mechanisms. The first part of her coping system is her diary itself. I mean, she immediately she pledges allegiance to it. Basically, says she's going to tell it everything, even the things she can't tell anybody. She says it's her best present, and um, at the time that means that was the thing she most needed. Um, and she absolutely does need this space for self-expression. And I mean, she's not being told what to think for a change, and she absolutely needs that. Um, there was a guest on the Twin Peaks Wonderful and Strange Logcast who put it this way. She said, Laura can express herself, which is good, but it's the only place she feels she can. And the diary cannot talk back or give love. It cannot explain why Laura's cognitive distortions are distortions. So, I mean, that sums up the major issue with where she goes, and eventually why she ends up splitting off into other things, probably. I mean, as far as the plot goes with this, at 12, she's worrying out loud about, it's like, oh, was Jesus doing things like this? Did he ever feel anything like I'm feeling? And then she talks about some fantasies that she has about, the kinds of things men should do, or she'd want to do to her or with her, hopefully. I mean, she's sharing all this for the first time. And then she talks about how she needs to find a safe place for this diary, and how she's going to tape it up on the back of her bulletin board. And she hopes it doesn't fall. So, I mean, that pretty much foreshadows the end of her 12th year when that diary does seem to be read. I'm sure it got unstuck and fell. And, it's one of those things that, I mean, it's almost like it was, it's almost like it was so fragile that, it almost had to happen kind of like that. Yet, over a year later, she comes back to the book. She sticks with this book, especially in regards to how she is with Bobby later. I mean, she puts everything in here, all her harrowing stories of when she's 15 and, doing the drug running and the getting kidnapped by truckers, things like that. It's all in the diary because she needs a place for this. Though at age 16, she'll split off from that. It's like how she has this public Laura that comes out in this book that is probably the thing that Harry Truman, you didn't know Laura Palmer. It's like we don't know public Laura. And in part it's probably because public Laura split off into its own diary. The mundane stuff, it's like, oh, asparagus again, things like that. It ends up that the diary itself is getting a shell that way, protecting it from being able to be where Laura puts her major thoughts. And then soon after that, she ends up bumping into Jacoby, where he gives her a cassette recorder and she starts recording there. And then that one ends up being less reinforcement. It's less of an echo chamber of her own thoughts in those cassettes. And Jacoby's actually there giving her recognition of cognitive distortions. He's not reinforcing how bad she is, or it's like all the things she believes about herself. He's not reinforcing any of that. But even with that, Laura still holds a reverence for the diary. I mean, however divided it is, whether there's an active helping herself Laura, whether there's a public, protect myself Laura, there's also the kind where she can just put her thoughts still, and that's still this diary the whole way through. And it's not something that she won't protect in multiple ways. I mean, the very last entry, she's going to give it to Harold for safekeeping. So yeah, the diary is probably her most important support system through this whole crazy ordeal. who should be her biggest support system through the whole thing, is probably supposed to be Leland and Sarah. Obviously, we know things, since this diary has been published, but, it's like her protectors are basically stuck looking from the outside in, if they're looking at all. I mean, of course, Leland's Bob, and I mean, there's bits and pieces through this about how Laura knows. I mean, in the 68th entry, the Bob's final voice appearance in the book. It's like right around when Laura's pregnant. Laura does that thing where she says, "Who are you really?" which gets echoed really creepily in Fire Walk with Me. And I mean, she gets a similar truth here, honestly. I mean, it's the same kind of setup. She asks this question, really means it, and then she actually gets the answer. It's just that Bob says, "I am what you fear I could be." So, like, she could know right then what the situation is, but she just, I don't know, whistled past it, I guess. But anyway, through the diary, we have Leland. Okay, so he starts off. The first thing we know about him is he likes the woods as much as Laura does. The second thing we know about him is he keeps secrets from everybody, including Sarah, about Troy the horse. Ooh, it would have ruined the surprise. Okay, whatever. And I counted it up. He's only in 10 entries as an active character, rather than, it's like, oh, when, oh, mom and dad, where are they? Like when she's thinking about him, that's a little different. But when he's actually a participating character in the diary, he's only in 10 of these things, and he's usually on the periphery. And the last entry when he physically appears is the Christmas Laura turns 15, and they're dancing in the living room, just like they used to do it. And Laura says, he's crying, he has a tear down his cheek or whatever. And then he's holding her tight, which I mean, it reminds me a lot of Maddie and Donna in the scenes of episodes 14 and 16. When he grips them really close after. Well, I mean, okay, Maddie, he wasn't doing it while she was dancing, but Donna, yeah, that's absolutely kind of what it looked like when he almost pulled her in and looked like he was getting ready to kill her before Truman interrupted. So I don't know if they used some of this diary language to code him that way, but it's possible that it's showing guilt. It's possible that Leland is actually getting through to like what he's doing in this case, and realizing something. I don't know, but Sarah thought it was happiness. This is this made my whole year. But yeah, I mean, this kind of going back to basics. That's the very last time Leland is ever mentioned in this book. As far as Sarah goes, one of the first thing we know is she gets in the dark with Leland's stuff. Second thing we know is that she ends up oversharing things, like that one time when Laura sleptwalked and took off all her clothes and put it in the dishwasher. And now the Haywards have a running joke every time that, as she walks past the dishwasher, it's like, oh, it's not it's not the washer, it's the oven, or like whatever it was. So yeah, after Laura shares that story, she says, Sarah was drinking at the time. So drinking, Sarah drinks, she medicates, or self-medicates. It's like, is it, it's like she goes into a different state of freedom or whatever when she drinks. Same way drugs are always kind of a way to unlock something. As far as the frog bug, gifted, damned, the Judy stuff, I mean, technically there could be a frog bug in there eating the pain, but I kind of think of that whole thing as that the frog bug hasn't matured yet. If Sarah hasn't seen Bob yet, that means that probably the frog bug is slightly dormant as well. what's probably really happening is Sarah's being blinded by, whether it's milk or the gaslighting or, it's like she doesn't see a horse yet. Like there's all these things that she. I mean, we're going to reassess this after Firewalk with me. Especially after that scene where Leland's telling her wash your hands. I mean, we're gonna give Sarah a good character dissection or whatever you call it, analysis. But right here, right now we have things like how Laura sometimes actually sees how she and Sarah could be friends. They have a solid conversation after they reconcile over Sarah revealing her period to everybody. Let's shine a light and walk away from why would Sarah think Leland would be so proud? I'm sure there's all sorts of behaviors why that would be. And I am glad that they don't really dig into any of them here because, but yeah, throughout the book, like there's a good talk they have, where they talk about Margaret, the log lady, after Laura meets her. There's times when she actually does get close to Sarah, but I kind of feel like, sure they share dreams, but they also share this ability to like keep secrets openly. I mean, Sarah, she, when that Christmas when Laura's 15, it's like she's looking backwards. She's not seeing necessarily what's really going on with Leland and Laura when they're dancing in their living room. She might be looking back and seeing Laura as a little girl and Leland as someone who's close to her. And that scene, that Christmas when she was 15, I mean, this was after a whole year of Laura trying to understand how Leland and Sarah never come in. It's like, is Bob holding them captive too? So that, did he scare them into not helping Laura? Are they in cahoots with Bob? It's like, is Bob in cahoots with God? There's all these things that, she's suspicious because she feels like Leland and Sarah do have to know something. And like, but regardless of all those permutations, the only time we see Sarah after this, and the only time she's mentioned after this one time in Laura's 15th Christmas, she's absolutely clueless when Laura gets home from her abortion. She's like, oh, how was the job interview? She's purposely looking away again. And then, she hears that Maddie called and that Laura was actually excited to talk to her and rushes off to do it. And Sarah shoots jealousy at Laura's back. So, sure, Sarah and Laura are connected through dreams, but that's not enough. You gotta be a little bit more active to have a real connection. And even Maddie has that, and she's like, miles away, literally. And Maddie is the other dream connected one. So like, does Sarah know that Maddie also has the dreams? I don't know. So is Sarah jealous toward Maddie or of Laura for being Leland's focus? There's all sorts of things. Or, is she just jealous toward anybody who knows her daughter and that her daughter is thankful for? Or is this like a really extra level creepy with how Leland is with Laura when he should be with Sarah? I don't. Yeah, this book is not easy. The book starts off with Laura being 12, and her first major support structure through that year of being 12, or the 4 months that she wrote as a 12-year-old, her biggest supporters were Donna and Maddie. So I noticed right away the very first thing we hear about Donna is that she bought Laura a present with her allowance that she'd been saving up for a while and keeping it secret from Laura. So okay, so they do keep secrets. That's kind of an established thing, even if it's just a birthday present level right now. but Laura really responds to, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to save up everything and I'm going to get her something really, really great. So, I mean, she's reciprocating with, an equal value, an equal sacrifice. It's like it's transactional the way she deals with friends, because probably Bob makes everything transactional already, even from skipping. So the first non Troy related thing after a couple of dreams is that Laura and Maddie and Donna all have a fort out in the backyard. And, Laura's talking about how it's security, it's like there's a safe place. There's it's made with close friends. The wood came from Ed, hammered together by Leland. It's like she's got all this stuff coming together to make this really cool fort where they can have their safe space. And, Donna's a realist through this whole thing. And she says, oh, I think this thing can fall over in a storm. But then Laura thinks it can withstand anything, the power of friendship or whatever. She's kind of dreaming. But we got Maddie also in there. And Maddie is 16. And Maddie is the 16 that Laura wants to have. She's Maddie is stylish. She's happy. She has a boyfriend to kiss, and and then she brings cigarettes, and all of this stuff is really cool to Laura. And this kind of starts off a pattern where Laura doesn't find things exactly on her own. She always has people that are part of her support system bringing her things, yeah, I mean, bringing drugs of varying levels. Maddie brings the first one, and it's the cigarettes. And, the first thing she says is like these wispy spirits are coming out of her. So it almost has like this level of I don't know. But yeah, Laura likes feeling not quite the way she would normally feel without it. In better advice, when Donna goes away for a little while, Maddie talks about how she saw Laura in the woods in some dreams, and gives Laura this advice to write about things in code. So, like, how much does Maddie know? I mean, she doesn't seem to know anything in the series, but like at this point, it's kind of like, wow, like what is she seeing? Uh, and she never said more about them because that's when Donna came back, and maybe she did talk to Laura about it later, but it never made it into the diary, which kind of to me says she probably never did finish talking about it. So yeah, Maddie will stay around a little bit longer. Like they try on clothes, and they talk about how Laura's growing up and all this. But after that, she only appears 2 more times in the book as, I mean, not in person, but as a reference. After Laura was 14, Maddie sent her a dress for Christmas that Bobby went absolutely wild for, and talked to Laura for over an hour, which Laura was excited about, but we didn't get to hear what about. And then after Laura was 16 and took stock of the 16 she never became, she never said Maddie at this at all. But then Maddie gets a message in her dream that Laura might have actually been trying to send her. And then, she says that, well, that's when she calls for Laura right after the abortion. So like all this taking stock of being 16, like she never once mentions Maddie, but it's all in the margins, and it pays off after she finally deals with the abortion. But that's at 16, after Laura's kind of come into her own sexually. But like right here at age 12, it's like she wakes up, she has an orgasm in her sleep, and she absolutely loves it because it's actually a good feeling that wasn't attached to anything. And then there's another entry where she's like, she wakes up, she's 15. I mean, she's not 15. She's, it's like 5:15 in the morning or something. And she doesn't know what's going on. She's been in the woods. Um, she has to be good. She can't be bad anymore. So obviously something happened here, and I honestly think that entry is probably Bob's first, full physical, rape assault on Laura at that time. And right after that, she gets her first period, which, of course, it's like this only complicates everything. This can only make things worse. So, yeah, I think she's been assaulted before that, and that things are not really going very well with Bob. And, the only respite she gets is a little bit further on, while within weeks of that, she finally realizes that she can masturbate. She finds the spot on her, the button or whatever she calls it, and it just feels good, and there's nothing attached to that. And it's like there's finally this part of her sexuality that she can control and that she can explore. But yet even at the very end, she puts on this little tag, just like, oh, I hope Bob doesn't come tonight. It's one of those kind of things where she worries that, it's like, oh, could this be bad? I hope it isn't. I really don't want to be bad. I don't want this to be bad. It's like she's in this push pull with sexuality the entire diary. And honestly, when she turns 13 and starts writing in the diary again, she actually starts to explore the sexuality with Donna. Um, okay, so when she's 13, her entries begin. She has little trust in anything. She's talking about how, like, she doesn't hold it against the diary, but there are people who will read you, blah, blah, blah. It's like there's a betrayal of trust there. And then she explores her sexuality alongside Donna with the Canadian boys, but the secrets end up splitting them up for most of the year until they finally reconcile toward the end. They talk in the open about, the unsure footing Donna and Laura have with each other after that. They kind of come to explain why they hadn't been talking, their insecurities with each other. And that ends up, there's a frank talk about it, which I'll go into a little bit. But what that ends up doing immediately after that is she ends up being able to speak frankly in the diary about what Bob has actually been doing. It's like the molestation, the little cuts in her mouth. I mean, things that are just too unspeakably bad for me to even want to voice. But yeah, it goes into the level of just how Bob has been, like, gradually more and more assaulting her as she gets older. But yeah, Laura being 13, the honesty of what's happening comes to the forefront in this year. And yeah, and Donna is a major focus with that. I mean, Laura comes right out and says that, she can't tell Donna about her fantasies and nightmares. I mean, she literally says that before the time with the Canadian boys in the pond or the lake. Uh, and most of the time, she's getting, she's talking about Donna like, I want to be good like Donna, so like Donna is the straight laced path that, she ends up straying from as she goes. But, then with the Canadian boys that they meet through the roadhouse, I mean, not through the roadhouse, through the bookhouse, Donna and Laura are like full in, this is a secret between them. And it's like they try marijuana with the boys. Now, I should point out, this is the scene in the 4th episode of season 2 that Donna recounts to Harold in her perspective, and you can kind of see how she kind of feels the magic of this night too. And it really is Donna's idea to go skinny dipping. She and Laura, they bare their skin, they touch the boys a little bit. They Donna ends up going off to the side with one of the boys and has a deep conversation all night while Laura's still in the lake. But and there's this secret nature of this night where, or I mean of this day, where they can like safely explore their sexuality here. And I mean it's a lot like the diary itself, it's like it's these pages that is a secret safe space for Laura to explore things safely. um oh, and also the escalation of drugs happens here. The harder liquor, the marijuana for the first time. Laura's experiencing this through her best friend and these safe boys. So they have this really nice chance to actually, support each other while they're learning things about themselves, and what they like and what they don't. And the problem is that right after this, basically Donna and Laura distance themselves from each other. It's like once they're outside the secret, it's like that time has passed. And then, all the reasons that they can come up with for shame, all that, it's easy to experience that when you're outside the bubble of this moment. um So why, like toward the end of this year, they come across the reason why Donna felt a little unsure of herself then is because she thought that Laura was, doing things with a boy before all this because she seemed so good at it. And, the they're having a little secret that is a positive growing place, but then, Donna thinks there's other secrets too, which, there are. I mean, then, can't tell Donna about her nightmares and her fantasies. It's the, Donna notices what's really there. And, the trust, the trust is hurt, even though they reconcile at the end of the of Laura's 13th year. um she's not really in the diary very much after this, except as, like the parts that we see of public Laura in here. It's like they have nothing in common. They obviously are talking to each other because she does keep coming up in like happenstance, like her and Mike, doing this and that. It's like, oh, she is so pure. So yeah, I mean, this is kind of where Laura continues on without her, because they're different people too. But Donna is definitely that symbol attached to the good part of Laura, the I do good things Laura, which she guilts herself over constantly. I don't know. But as far as like Laura being able to explore her sexuality, she does so more from this point forward with Bobby, who finally shows back up in the diary. Laura's 14th year begins with her skipping out on a birthday party. She's telling her mom that, it's like, okay, in the next couple of years, I will do the parties, but this year I want to figure things out and then come back absolutely fresh, clear out my head, get everything right. Um, so she goes to the forest where Bob takes her for all the wrong things that ever happened to her. And you know, she does mention that she's seeing Bobby here, but she declares that she's going to start fighting against Bob here too. Now, one thing we see all the time with Laura in year 14 is she definitely has control over Bobby. The first thing we hear with him is that he gets her marijuana. um then we see that they have this genuine romantic encounter, where she had to squelch everything she was feeling because she wanted to protect herself and Bobby from Bob. And this is where he starts to close off, meaning Bobby Briggs starts closing off. And then we see Laura exploring the parameters of what her actual situation is with Bob too, from the extent of what he does to her to like how he treats her, that kind of thing. Um, so we're getting closer to what Bob actually is. She even starts asking, like, who is he? Like she's starting to acknowledge the fact that she doesn't know much about him. Um, and this happens all the while Bobby is introducing her to cocaine and, parties at Leo, things like that. And it's probably things she's requesting of him, find me something exciting. Now, this is all good information that we get about Bobby so that we can kind of understand where he began before we get the jerk in the series of Twin Peaks. But he's introduced briefly as the hair-pulling boy in one of Laura's 12-year-old entries. Ashley from the Twin Peaks podcast, which is absolutely wonderful, and I recommend you going back to see it. She specifically said about the hair pulling, the 12-year-old side of Bobby Briggs. She says she's really struck by the inclusion of the detail that Bobby, as a young boy, pulled Laura's pigtails, and Laura's visceral reaction to the notion that she and Bobby were going to get together, and that this was a cute, flirtatious thing he was doing. And the person propagating that is Norma, who we know is in an unhealthy relationship with Hank at the time. And that pigtail pulling is sort of a microcosm of the way that young girls are socialized to accept abuse. This is all Ashley saying this. On a spectrum of going from kind of the mundane things like pigtail pulling and nagging, or whatever you want to call it, going all the way up to what Laura is experiencing with Bob. And that reminds me of how Jennifer Lynch, as I said earlier, was talking about, just like how women are socialized to compete against each other and things like that. And like all of these things are like just baked into the structure of the reality that the readers had, back when this book was new. And, of course, that means Laura had it too. But, it's like we all experience this sort of stuff as quote unquote normal. Okay, so I've already said that at the beginning of this entry, or at the beginning of the 14-year-old entries, that it's all implied that like Bobby is doing these things that Laura is asking him to do, the genuine sex, the cocaine, the parties at Leo's, that kind of stuff. And he's essentially a loyal puppy. It's like he's a well-meaning protector, and it's like, how does he protect her? By like protecting her wants, which is, escalating her drugs, things like that. I don't know. I mean, Bobby seems to have a tenuous hold on Laura, and he kind of knows it. At that party with Leo, it's like he's just recently started having sex with Laura at this point, and one of the first things he says to her at the party at Leo's is, that guy's into some weird shit. Don't ever fuck him. It's like he knows that Laura would entertain having sex with other people. And before I focus on Bobby specifically, I want to go to that party and point out when there was that woman asking for $100 for somebody to get her off. Laura is the one who does it. And what she does, and this is her first experience with a woman, what she does is she goes up to this woman and she starts talking to her and giving her these safe boundaries. It's like there's always communication. It's like, do you want this? And she gets her consent. She talks about how all the people around her want that. Like they want her. They think she's beautiful. Like I think she is. That all these things that. I mean, this is what Laura wants for herself, and she's giving it to this woman who has nothing to do with Bob. And it's like if it can't happen for Laura, she's going to make sure it happens for others. And we're basically getting a glimpse of what positive sex is for Laura in this quote unquote safer situation. And her first time with Bobby seems like this too, down in the barn in Lowtown, which. Things things happen to them in Lowtown, which is like kind of the darker side. It's like the town version of the woods, it seems like. Yet this is where they go for Bobby and Laura in a barn to have sex for the first time. But, of course, Laura can't let herself feel something so pure and positive with him because of all the stuff that Bob has messed her up about. In Ali Sharaba's article at 25YL, Bobby Briggs and Laura Palmer, A Love Story, I'm going to quote her about this. She says, Laura's sexual development was and could never be that of a normal adolescent girl. The abuse twisted up her perspective on sex, and she was never given a chance to develop sexual appetites and preferences untainted by the abuses she suffered. She had certain desires, for example, rough sex with older men, that she felt were wrong, but she had no control over the things she fantasized about. With Bobby, though, she wanted to make love. She wrote, I was, for the first time, beginning a sexual experience with interest and affection, a little control of my own. It wasn't just about herself, though. She wanted to make Bobby happy, too. She felt he deserved to be treated well for all that he did for her, but since she was terrified of the vulnerability that comes with the emotion of loving someone, all she knew how to do was give him the physical act of love. She was free with herself physically, but emotionally, she was in an impenetrable fortress. So, Sharaba pretty much sums this up in this article. I highly recommend it. There's this undercurrent of light in this book, and Laura always keeps track of it. There's a poem toward the beginning of the book where she talks about her with Bob can see her light from the window. So like she recognizes a lot that she has light in herself, and like she never completely loses track of that, even in her later entries when she's like despondent about pretty much everything. She'll also say later on that she'll cling to the bit of light and she'll cling to the bit of light left inside her when she decides officially to go into battle against Bob after she ruins this experience with Bobby. She talks about light and she'll recognize it. Um, and usually it's not even necessarily inside herself, but like she recognizes light regularly. But here she needs to laugh at Bobby, and I'm quoting the diary, until his eyes lost their light. So yeah, she believes in light, but she does not believe that she deserves the love that comes from light. In a lot of ways, this love that Bobby expresses to her after this afternoon, it's almost like how when her period came, she said, this can only complicate things and this can only make things worse. And I feel like she feels that any kind of love that comes toward her can only make things worse too, or can only be dangerous. Now, I do agree with Sharaba that, she'll go on to say that, Laura keeps Bobby around in hopes that the good Laura can come out again one day and be with him. But yeah, that makes it really hard when she won't let good Laura come out for very good reasons, but she's not letting it happen. Now on a periodic basis, like even as late as 15 at age 15, I think he says this too, that he feels like they're meant to be together, even when they're stuck going through motions. And like almost having a pretend relationship, he still feels that like they're kind of meant to be together. Around that Christmas when Laura's 15, they'll have another sexual encounter that bookends this one when they're 14. And it's right after she admits the extent of her coke addiction, where like she'll say, it's like, yeah, sometimes I would choose coke over you, but sometimes I'd choose cocaine over everything. It's like she can admit where she is with Bobby a lot more than pretty much anybody else. They come together a couple times to like genuinely share things, and they actually do have a tender moment where they do have that kind of deeper sex with just like that first time. But just like then, at this point in time when she's 15, it's Christmas time. Bob intrudes right after that too. Um, and it's the only other time he comes back in full voice in the diary is after her abortion, or I mean, like around the time of her abortion when she's 16. And this time, right after another experience with Bobby, this is where he like goes on to, I don't need anything, I want things. And I mean, Laura basically will say, why can't she experience these happy feelings without thinking that she might die because of them? So, like, every time she has a good moment with Bobby, she'll have a Bob intrusion, pretty much in her diary, um, telling her why this can't possibly be happening. Now, after that Christmas at Laura's 15th year, I mean, the relationship that she has with Bobby is, I mean, it's mostly in the margins. It's like he's kind of just like Donna in this way, where they're the public Laura couple at that point, and we're mostly outside looking in on that. So maybe he's in the tapes to Jacoby, maybe he's in the quote unquote good Laura diary, but yeah, before that, um, I mean. Laura's first entry as a 15-year-old is when they go into Lowtown with Leo to get a whole bunch of drugs. And it's almost like this, they basically almost all die at that uh, drug deal. And they're driving back, and they find out that one of these people that they bought the drugs from is actually in the back of the truck, and is going to shoot them from there too as they're trying to get away. And Bobby pulls out his dad's gun, and shoots the guy off the back of the truck. So I mean, he essentially this is Bobby killed a guy. This is the thing that James will mention in one of the early episodes of season 1. And I know it gets retconned in Fire Walk with Me, but here this is that moment. And one of the things they talk about, in addition to Laura's drug addiction around Christmas and in Laura's 15th year, is that that they'll kind of finish coming to terms, or in the diary they'll finish talking about how he did essentially kill somebody. And like throughout this, between that instance where he killed the guy and that Christmas, um it's like we'll find out that Laura does try to talk to him about it every once in a while. They don't react to it immediately. It's like it's one of those time delay things, like, oh man, that happened. um and like this is another one of those moments of guilt that kind of ties them together, um in like a negative frequency kind of thing. Bobby will get quiet, he'll cry about it. And then there's that other way how this stuff like kind of is embodied in a supernatural way, not just in like Bob following after Bobby, but Bob mentions that about that guy that Bobby killed. It's like he says that the dead man gives Bob a message to give to Laura that there's a seat in hell waiting for her. So like this whole thing that she and Bobby shared is also another source of guilt. And that seat in hell that Laura has, I mean, it's even referenced in the final entry when she's very close to her death. It's like she still remembers this moment, and it's one of those things that she holds on to, just like everything else. Now, I talk about Bobby being with Laura as like her main person in years 14 and 15, but honestly, when Laura turns 15, she's mostly focused on Leo and Jacques. Bobby is there, but it's Leo, Jacques, and Ronette who are her strongest group. And I'll get into Ronette later, but well, I mean, the Diane podcast, when they were covering the diary, they basically say they really like the retcon to Leo and Jacques here. It really forms them into people, and I concur. I agree with that one. Leo's kind of wild and everything, but like he actually has one of those connections to Laura. So we first meet him as the host of the Sex and Drugs Party. We'll find him taking her blindfolded into the woods. It's clear that she likes a lot of what Leo is. It's like they both kind of have this woods connection. And honestly, like she goes in trusting him when he blindfolds her and takes her to that first sex party where like she is the object in the sex party, or the main focus. Aiden from the Bickering Peaks podcast, they now go by the Bicks and cover Shakespeare, but they definitely did a really great job covering the diary in one of their Twin Peaks episodes when they were Bickering Peaks. He kind of thinks that Laura pulled Leo further into the woods because kind of at the beginning he's more of just like a hedonistic experiencer. I mean, I wouldn't exactly call him akin to Jerry Horne per se, but it's like they seem to kind of work on appetite. But then he gets into